It almost seems like the inevitable. BYU is going local for its head coaching search. At least that's the idea. If you're building a short list of candidates, I think where you have to start is anywhere around the Wasatch Mountains, anywhere around Provo, Utah, or Salt Lake City, Utah. You might not even have to leave the same exit on the interstate to go find somebody who worked at Utah Valley or Utah or BYU or Indian Hills Community College. That's where I want to go. But first, the caveat I'm going to give you, if you're a BYU fan, you're listening, this is something that I had to educate myself on more intently over the last 48, 72 hours, the Mark Pope news. Does BYU have to hire a member of the LDS Church as a head coach? And the answer, as of very recently, I think it's 2021, is no. No. Tom Holmoe has made hires now of head coaches who are outside of the faith. And I know that it's such a strong relationship between BYU, the flagship program of the fastest growing religion of the world, the LDS Church, and that faith itself, the commitment to that faith, creates an environment where most of the staff at BYU and students are members of the church, but it's not a requirement for the head coach to be a practicing LDS member. However, it probably helps. However, if it's not a 100% you have to be, but boy, there's a 98% chance that the guy who gets this job is probably going to fit the bill in that category. And one who comes to mind, and KSL did a great write-up on him, is Chris Burgess, the Utah assistant coach. It is not shocking, if you follow BYU athletics at all, it's not shocking to know that a Utah assistant is being considered at BYU. The head coach at Utah, plug your ears if you're a Utes fan, in football, Kyle Whittingham would probably love and I had dreamt of being the BYU head coach. And instead, he's at Utah beating BYU. That's the way these two schools have operated, with the fun little middleman, Utah Valley, who's just kind of there in the middle. And you're like, every now and the occasional Southern Utah or a Utah State, but Utah Valley's right there to just feed guys to both of these schools. And Burgess, who's an assistant at Utah, has been there since 2022. Guess where he came from? BYU under Mark Pope. He was at BYU from 2019 to 2022, and again has been at Utah for the last 2 seasons. Prior to being at BYU, well, boy, howdy, you guessed it. He was an assistant at Utah Valley from 2015 to 2019. Prior to that, Indian Hills Community College, Salt Lake Community College, and prior Utah student assistant. So he's a Utah guy through and through. He's a Ute. And KSL writes that one significant advantage for Chris Burgess over candidates like Mark Madsen is that Burgess has BYU coaching experience on his resume. The guy was under Mark Pope. He is not, to me, an exact replica of what Pope was, but he fits what BYU is, and there is continuity there. There are enough players that are familiar with Burgess that he could be okay. And he's going to have to. The thing that I maybe dislike the most about Burgess, who might be the top of my list right now of realistic and reasonable candidates when you consider the LDS push, or at least attempt to get a guy who's in that category. What I like about Burgess is that he's young at 44. He's got the Mark Pope experience. What I don't love is inexperience as a head coach and operating the transfer portal, because when the guy walks in day one, whoever it is, they're going to have to toy with the portal to keep guys at BYU, to bring new guys into BYU, and try to do that in such a unique way. Here's the one caveat, the one good part, though, about a guy who doesn't have head coaching experience when it comes to operating the transfer portal is he's been at BYU. He's been around Salt Lake City. He's been around Provo. He's been in the area. He knows what it takes to recruit to a school that is BYU, a school that has different requirements from a culture, from a morals, from an ethics standpoint. When that guy goes out on the trail in the transfer portal, he knows where to look immediately. If you call tomorrow a John Calipari, who obviously this is all hypothetical, work with me here. If John Calipari was hired as the BYU head coach tomorrow, he wouldn't know how to handle himself. He wouldn't be able to do it. There are stipulations. There are requirements. There is a higher standard on that campus and from that administration that some guys just can't fit or just can't handle. So they go to the big state schools and they do things differently. At BYU, you need a guy who is BYU. You need a guy who is experienced. To the extreme of Mark Pope making Texas, was it BYU fans removed horns down shirts during a Texas game? No, that's way too dramatic. Don't hire that guy. I don't like that. I'll get into that more in a bit. But do bring in a guy in Burgess who knows how to recruit BYU. KSL writes as well, Burgess was an aggressive recruiter during his time at BYU. Before the pandemic, Burgess was active in international recruiting, strong ties to the recruiting scene in Utah as well. That is going to be huge. Go find the guys that are coming back from mission. Go find the guys in the portal who fit BYU's brand and bring them in under a coach like Mark or Chris Burgess. Mark Madison's good. He's also on my list. KSL had a great write-up about him too. Bringing a guy like Chris Burgess and I don't know. I think they want to get everybody fired up. That's my take. Coming up, Mark Pope is gone. I released this last week, and I want to revisit it. This was my immediate reaction to Mark Pope leaving BYU, something that I think is okay. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, and it's every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go. Like, oh, rent's coming up? Sweet. FanDuel exists. I can go and I can say, I think that Nick Castellanos is going to hit a home run because some weird stuff in the world's been happening, and then he does at plus 300, and I put $10 on it, I win $30. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball is in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, easy to use. What are you waiting for? FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on today.